to have difficult conversations with people and to not be afraid of conflict, right? I think more and more people are afraid to disagree or are
That's right.
afraid to just have and even to phrase it like, hey, I think we might need to have a difficult conversation, but I want to start off by affirming the fact that I'm committed to our working relationship and I want this to go well. And I think this might be something that will actually help us grow, but it might be awkward for a minute. So can we talk about
Hmm.
this? So to be able to do that in a way, like I'm not afraid to do that. And it took me a little bit of getting there, but you met Melt, right? Like I was basically raised to face difficult situations and have difficult conversations.
Yeah. So those of us who have been teaching for a while always have that moment where we see a former student who's now an adult or a colleague, and it's that reminder, oh crap, I'm pretty old. Listen, I've had those experiences for a long time. But this is actually something even different in the sense that today's guest is somebody that I knew as a baby and have been able to be participating somewhat in her life for for her entire life. And in this case, not so much a realization that I'm old. I've come to that a long time ago, but also really, I think just a point of pride to watch. And you're really proud of this young woman who has grown into being just a fantastic professional and adult in general, but watching her develop over these years and different experience that she's had. So really excited about today's guest. Meredith Rhinas is a senior administrator at the Saskatchewan Teachers Federation, following in the footsteps of her father, Milton Block, who was my guest on episode 73. And so if you want to do a little comparison at some point to see how much the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, you can make those comparisons. I wasn't quite sure exactly how the conversation would go. I wanted to hear her journey, particularly as a female in leadership and lessons she's learned. We certainly get into that, but also talking about some of the health issues that she's had over the years, and then also diving into her experience with social media. She's amassed quite a following and has been a content creator for a lot of years, and how that sort of interplay still is happening in what is pretty political position in many ways. Again, just really fascinating. It was just so lovely to catch up with Meredith and hear her journey, her story, and just a delight. I enjoyed my conversation, and I know you will too today with Meredith Rhinas. So here's a fun fact. You, of all the guests I've had, I've done 117 episodes. I don't know if I'd say I'd known you the longest, but I've known you for literally your entire life. I've known you when you were a baby. I met you when you were a baby, right? So
Yeah.
that's fun.
It is fun. We have a long history together. I have many memories of making what felt like a very long drive to Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan to hang out with you folks and your kids. And yeah, I think it's great. It's great to be here and to be able to chat with you as colleagues now for sure.
Yeah, and interesting to think about. Most of my education colleagues you meet when you're an adult, and so you don't know of where they came from, but I know you from whence you began
Yes.
as a little girl and young
All the
woman.
history.
And so I guess it's very satisfying to see kind of all the things that you've done. And you've done a lot of different things as well. And I'm going to start actually, and I apologize because we talk about questions, but this isn't a question that I had, but I just thought of it now. So
That's
you have had some interesting experiences using social media, and dare I say the word influencer in some way, shape, or
yes.
form. So first of all, give us sort of the synopsis of that part of your life. And
Sure.
then if you can, and I don't say you have to, but if there is a sort of connection to, oh, this helped me in my current role in education, or what sort of parallels you made, if at all there were, but just share a little bit about that side of your life and maybe even where that stands today.
Sure. Yeah, no problem. I don't mind talking about it. We always like in that influencer community. I always preferred the term content creator, but I fully
Yes.
understand what you're getting at there. And I got into the social media world right after I had my third baby. I was at home. She was an unexpected baby. So I had a 5-year-old and a 4-year-old, and then I had this baby. And my big kids went off to preschool and kindergarten, and I was home and I was looking for some community. I lived in a small town. I wasn't at work. I've always known that I am the kind of person who is actually better at all aspects of my life if I work. So I'm a better mom when I have a job, something that I'm also doing outside of motherhood. And I was living in the small town. I didn't have my work community anymore, and I was looking for connection. And this was back in about 2017 when I think this whole idea of influencing was really starting to take off. And so I had some people speak into my life at that point and suggest that my Instagram account was very aesthetic and that there was an opportunity there for me to maybe monetize that and create this community of like-minded women, moms primarily looking at lifestyle content and that sort of a thing. So I did that. I thought maybe this is something I can do. And I like to be good at the things that I'm doing. Who doesn't? But I threw myself into that intentionally and was able to grow a fairly large following, I would say. I think at its peak, I had about 55,000 followers when I was doing that very intentionally. And I was monetizing the platform and had created a brand for myself that I felt really good about, that was really authentic to me and who I am and my values and all of those pieces. I was able to build this really great community of like-minded women, and we were all doing the same thing in our lives. And then I guess I developed some credibility among that group of women, and I was able to promote some products, work with some companies, do that sort of influencing side of things where I was able to monetize the platform. And then things did shift for me. I did that sort of intentionally for, I guess, probably 4 years or so into the COVID years. I was doing that quite intentionally, so maybe 4 or 5 years. And then there was a shift for me during COVID. I did feel like a lot of those platforms changed a lot. They were, for a period of time there, definitely during COVID, it was very polarizing to be in that space a lot. And so I did shift my focus in being in that space. But one of the things that came out of shifting my focus is that I did find myself using my platform for more advocacy type situations. So one of the big ones for me is heart health and women's heart health in particular. I had open heart surgery back in 2018, and I have a congenital heart defect that I've lived with my whole life and was very lucky and blessed to survive a tricky surgery back in 2018. So I have worked lots with the Heart and Stroke Foundation here in Canada, promoting advocacy around women's heart health. And that kind of also led me to talk more about my job as a teacher. And people would reach out to me, moms who knew that I was a teacher. I was never quiet about being a teacher. I was always very conscious of the fact that I was a teacher who was on social media, because there's a lot of people are like, how do you do that? How do you make that work? And for me, it was just a matter of I was always prepared to stand behind anything I posted. I felt good about it. I felt proud about it. I was careful. And I didn't really ruffle a lot of feathers with the things that I would post. But during bargaining and negotiating, for sure, when we had that very intense round here in Saskatchewan, I decided to use my platform to try and help people understand what was going on, what teachers were wanting, some of the more technical terminology around the bargaining and negotiating process, trying to maybe even shed a little light into the government perspective on things, because I also come from a bit of a political family. So I found myself in this unique situation where I had this captive audience. People felt freedom to ask me what was going on. And I actually had access to the resources to be able to explain it in a way that I thought would be helpful. So I did that. I created several videos that talked about what was going on in Saskatchewan with bargaining and negotiating. And several of them went viral here in Saskatchewan and were widely shared. And I got a lot of really good feedback on that. And then actually, they were reposted by the Saskatchewan Teachers Federation as helpful resources on their stories and things during that time. So I think I put myself on the radar of my current employer because of the social media platform that I built. So it really evolved in the time that I used it. And now I don't use it very often anymore. I still will use it to advocate for certain things, particularly the heart health piece.
Right.
But yeah, it was really interesting how ironically doing this little social media thing back in 2017, I think actually had a big impact on the work that I'm able to do now, for sure.
That's it. I didn't know that sort of connection between your social media presence and then, your current role, which I think is fascinating. And I think that's something that, just generally speaking, and this has been an ongoing conversation amongst educators for, I would say, since the advent, let's go back to 2007, when Twitter and social media really began to become a prominent space.
Right.
When educators found it, they weren't thinking necessarily at the time, it wasn't being used as a platform to promote, but it evolved to that, right?
Yeah,
And so educators who were using that space, there was always that struggle. And as a teacher, there was probably times where you heard, oh, stay away because it's only going to be problematic. The only
yeah,
way, this only ends badly. And it has. Certainly there's stories of where it's not gone well
for sure.
for teachers. But I think your story is really powerful in terms of, I think the thing that you said that really resonates with me is everything you posted, you checked in your head, like, am I proud to post this? Am I worried about this? So which is
Yeah,
a little bit of somewhat of an antithesis to what social media is, because social media is supposed to be instant Instagram. You
right.
just stream of consciousness, boom, you share it out there, which
Putting
has
it out there.
happened often. And again, that's where it can go really poor. But in your case, like, you really, and I'm guessing that whole experience as a content creator really informed the way you, here's my sort of, this is definitely showing the evolution of social media, is that there's social media initially was presented as a way to be super authentic. And I'm not trying to say what you were presenting was authentic, but it was definitely more crafted
Yeah,
than the intent of it. And I think that's the evolution of the space and the platform. And for
absolutely.
lots of reasons, that is now the way you have to think of it.
Yeah, and it's one of those things just in education, just picking up on what you picked up on that I said too, is I think as educators, we are in a environment now where a lot of what we talk about can be viewed as polarizing, and there's a lot of advocacy and activism and all of these different things that are part of just society and the experience that we're in. And so kids are bringing this into the classroom and teachers are having questions about it, and what we teach and how we teach it is being informed by all kinds of ideas and all of these pieces. And I think it's really important for anyone in any career, any job in education. It's like, is this a hill I want to die on? And also recognizing that you might die on that hill. like you might choose something or do something or make a decision about something, and you might feel very passionate about that thing, but it might be problematic, right? So I do think there's that like check and balance that as educators we have to do. You're a teacher 24/7. How do we put ourselves out in the world when there are so many ideas and there is so much polarizing content, and how do we make sure that we really feel good? Because you might have a situation in your life where you feel really strongly about something that you have to reconcile how you handle this thing that you feel really strongly about with the role that you have also, right?
And also it's there's a cost benefit too. So I think about, okay, so you're doing this interview with me, and I would like to think that your colleagues at the STF and other people will watch this. And my goal is that when people view this, they'll say, oh, Meredith, she's a awesome person and so much to learn from. And this is an asset, a value proposition for the STF and teachers in general, whatever. But
Yes.
there's going to be somebody watching this, as I'm sure when you said you got positive feedback for your post. But I know, having been in this space for a long time, there were people who weren't so positive. Now, but
Absolutely.
what I'm assuming is that the positives far outweigh the negative, right? So
Yeah.
the fact that you're doing this, there's not zero risk. There is risk, and there will
Sure.
be people who will be critical. And so I guess what I'm trying to get at is, I feel that educators, education or organizations, whether it's school divisions, whether it's advocacy groups or whatnot, are more apt to opt out completely using social spaces because of the fear of that small percentage of negative.
Right.
Then
Yeah,
and so I guess what I'm trying to help people understand is, because having largely positive experiences, like, how do you position the use of these communication tools and say, yeah, I get it. Somebody's going to say a nasty thing about you. Somebody's not going to like it.
exactly. Yeah.
But the benefits, right? So how do you help people understand that there are benefits when you advocate in thoughtful, intelligent ways that people go, wow, that's a great point. I hadn't thought of it. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is the biggest thing for people to understand who they are and what their values are, what their, who they are as people, but also who they are within their profession, within all of the different hats that they have to wear and whatnot. I think knowing, which is why I said what I said to you, I always felt good about what I posted. And I always felt like I feel good if someone questions me. I still feel good about this.
Sure.
I stand by what I said and I'll say it again, the thing, right? And so and I do think, like you said, social media evolved from this place of being like, teachers were literally told you shouldn't have any social media. And if you do, you should use a fake name and you should never this or that, all these things. I don't think we say that anymore. I think we understand that social media is alive and well and people are using it and there's some really positive benefits to using it and building community. And you think about a place like Saskatchewan where we have teachers in small rural schools who are able to use the social media platform to connect with teachers in other parts of the province and share resources and like all kinds of things like that. And that's just within Saskatchewan, never mind the wealth of connection and information that's available around the world, right? So it really just comes down to for me, it was always, I'm going to be a professional wherever I am, right? I'm going to be a
Right.
professional in the way I use my space. I'm going to stand behind what I post, what I share. I'm going to recognize that I am not going to win everybody over. I'm not for everybody. I'm okay with that now. It took me a long
Mhm.
time. I was like a people pleaser as a child, and it was really bothersome to me that not everybody likes you or appreciates your perspective, but I'm okay with that now.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
recognize that I'm not for everybody, but I think that I have been able to conduct myself in a way and achieve some things in my life that would dictate that I might not be for everybody, but I am for some, and there's
Sure.
good work that I can do in those spaces, right?
That's right. Yeah, and again, that's all about maturing and finding that your own authenticity. And that's where, when you get to that point where this is who I am, and some people find, and you obviously know that lots of people are resonating with you, and that's fine that not everybody does, but
Yeah,
I'm good with who I am, right? I'm not trying to be something I'm not. So
exactly.
let's shift gears a little bit, talk about today and what you're doing right now, and just give me the, I don't know, 2 to 3 minute elevator pitch of your job right now. What
I
do you
do.
do?
Sure. So I am a senior administrative staff member at the Saskatchewan Teachers Federation. And basically, in that role, I have a series of school divisions that are in my portfolio that I work with. And I provide support and advocacy to teachers in those school divisions, most often when they are having some sort of an issue with their employer. So we are very concerned about the teacher profession, but also we're a union. And so we are representing teachers and their interests within their school divisions. So I work with, like I said, several school divisions across the province, and I provide individual support and representation to teachers when they need it in employment, labor related issues. But also in my work here at the Saskatchewan Teachers Federation, I sit on several committees where we deal with all kinds of things related to the profession itself. And also, I am on the bargaining committee. So during this next round of bargaining and negotiations, I get to be part of that team that is going to be actively engaged in bargaining and negotiating with the government for salary and benefits and all of those things. And that's the work of the Federation as well. So, as a senior administrative staff member, I'm part of the strategic planning team here at the Federation, and I work with an incredible team of people. I started working here in the fall of 2024. So it's a year and a half that I've been working in this role, and I absolutely love it. And it's busy work. It's, I believe, very important work. And I absolutely love the fact that I get to work as a former teacher in education, advocating for teachers and trying to make a difference in the education world from a totally different view and perspective,
Right.
right? So that's what I do. And I love it. I absolutely love this work.
And again, as you mentioned before we hit record, you have an interesting background in the
I
sense that
do.
you're in the same office as your father, who
Yes.
occupied largely the same role. And so you have all of that background knowledge to this role that the average educator wouldn't have had, and the probably average
Absolutely.
colleague coming into a similar position wouldn't have. However, my question is, what do you understand now, a year and a half into the job, about the work that perhaps you didn't quite fully grasp until, all right, now I'm actually in the seat?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. I had a very good understanding of this work long before I ever applied for the job because my dad got hired to work in the same role when I was 17 years old. So my entire experience as a teacher has been through the lens of the work of the Federation, because of course my dad was my sounding board. I followed in his steps as an educator, and this is the thing that my dad and I have always had in common and we talk about is our work and education and teacher advocacy and all of these pieces. So I've never not understood the work of the Federation. Of course, I didn't know all of the details about the kinds of cases he was working
Sure.
on or what he was doing. There's a lot of confidentiality in what this role entails. But that being said, I did understand the purpose of the Federation and why it exists, what it does for teachers, all those things. So I was very prepared for that work and I'm very excited to do it. I think the thing that has been the biggest adjustment for me in this role is actually how much we, in our role, absorb the emotions of others, right?
Mhm.
So there's a lot of people don't often call us because they're having a great day. They usually call us because something is going on. There's something
Right,
stressful.
right,
And whether it's in the workplace, whether it's with a colleague, whether it's something personal that's going on and they need access to a medical leave or whatever it is. Like we provide support and advocacy for teachers in their with their employers. And there's a lot of just like absorbing people's difficult experiences and trying to hold space for that, but also to be able to say, okay, that I validate this experience and your feelings about this. Now let's get to the facts and see what we can do about this situation. So it's very relational and teaching is relational. Anyone who teaches knows that it's largely about relationships. So it's not that I was surprised that this was going to be a relational role, but I think you can't understand what that kind of the weight of that kind of a job until you do
right.
it. I don't think yeah, that was new for me. It's a very I feel very honored to be brought into these kind of difficult situations that people are having and to be able to actually help them through those
Right.
situations. But that yeah, I think that was something that I've had to understand more about and just yeah, I guess you could say it surprised me. Maybe it shouldn't have, but it just
Yeah, those are lots of things that you know, but you don't feel, right?
sure.
Like, how can
You
you
can't
feel
really
that till you
know.
actually do
Yeah.
it? Like, someone says, "Here's what it's like to be a parent," and if you're not a parent, you go, "Yeah, okay, I understand that," but you don't know
Yeah.
until you actually are in that role. So, that's understandable. So,
Absolutely, yes.
when you think about your sort of evolution as an educator, starting as a classroom teacher and being a
Yeah.
consultant and various roles. So, okay, here's your new role where you've identified the impact and the real challenge of wow, I have to the relationships that I have to forge dealing with some heavier types of challenges. That's what you've experienced there. When you look back at the trajectory, when you maybe just give us a quick pause at each of the stages of your career, and
Mhm.
maybe when you look back thinking like, oh, that was the thing, that was the sort of overall, I don't know if challenge is the right word, but that's the thing I had to really learn over time in that role because that was the really difficult thing. So if you want to start with your role as a teacher and then move through that.
Yeah, sure. So my role as a teacher, again, I grew up with a parent who was a teacher. And everyone always says teaching is everyone thinks they know what a teacher does because you all had a teacher and you all went to school, but really it's like watching a play and you don't see all the things that happen behind the curtain. Of course, that is true. So I think for any teacher, actually going from this idea that you're going to be a teacher to actually being a teacher in the classroom, there's a huge learning curve there. And for me, I had some really interesting experiences very early on in my career. I taught overseas at private international foreign schools for 4 years. Very early on in my career, my first contract was at a private international school in South Korea. And it was actually a for profit school, which working in a for profit school was very eye opening. Just it functioned very differently than a publicly funded school does. And it gave me a huge heart for publicly funded education, to be honest. And I know for some people, they went the other way where they had the opportunity to teach in a private school setting. And for them, that was like, oh, this is the best. I always want to teach. For me, it was the opposite. I was like, teaching in private schools that were privately funded and in particular for profit really gave me a huge heart for publicly funded education and for wanting to make sure that's something that remains important and a focus for where I live, the people who live in my province or part of my context, right? So that was something being overseas. Another thing I always tell people that was interesting for me about the overseas experience would be you learned very quickly the difference between teachers who travel and travelers who teach,
Right.
right?
Right. Right.
So for me, I was like, I am a teacher. It is very cool that I get to go and do these other things, but I was always very much about the profession of it all. And
Right.
this is my job, this is my role. And you don't always get that experience in all international settings because people have different motivations for why they are doing what they're
Right.
doing potentially. But so I think that whole first season of teaching for me, the challenge of it was I think any teacher's first challenge is just the learning curve on something, but then also being away from home, really figuring out what kind of teacher I was and how what I really valued about education was something that I was able to compare fairly quickly in my career these different types of school systems and different types of schools and figure out quickly what I believed was best or what I thought not best, but where
Sure.
my value lied
Yeah.
within the system and where I thought I would be most able to add value as an
Right.
educator. So I would say as a teacher, that was I did move around a lot and have a lot of different
Hmm.
types of experiences. I also worked in a school division as an English as an additional language facilitator. And that was a great experience for me. I'll be perfectly honest, and I'm going to stand behind what I say today. And this is not meant to offend anybody at all because I think people in school division offices do excellent work. That's not an easy role to have either in a division office. As the employer, they have a very different role and they have to wear different hats. And those are challenging roles to have, and they're very important and very necessary. But my experience working in a school division, and it had nothing to do with anyone that was actually in the division office, was just that I realized that my heart didn't lie in working for a school division, like, or working in a division office. Doing that work showed me that actually wasn't the direction that I wanted to go in. And I always thought that it would be. I thought I was going to become a principal and then I was going to work my way up to work in a division office. But I realized that's not where that just wasn't where my passion was, I should say. It's not that I don't think it's very important, but it wasn't where my passion was. And I started to realize that my passion was actually in this kind of a role where I get to be an advocate for teachers and really work to continue to fight for a strong publicly funded education system. So all of my experiences led
Yeah.
me to this place where I understood where I thought I could add value because of what I was passionate about.
So when let's go back to just dive a little deeper into your role as a consultant and sort of this realization that, so what was there something that was happening at the time, whether it was provincially or just even internally, that was shifting your attention to saying, oh, that's the thing that's really grabbing my heart and mind at this point? Was there a specific or issues that were happening at the time?
Yeah, I think it's just I got hired to be a teacher in when did I convocate? I convocated in 2008, spent 2 years overseas. So I was back in Saskatchewan in 2010. And not to get all political, but the funding model started to change. I think it was around 2008 that things started to shift. And so my entire experience as a teacher in Saskatchewan has been in a sort of evolving, that schools have been evolving in terms of what teachers do, what's expected of them, what kind of resources are available. All of those pieces, the complexities within classrooms is really, I felt that shift through the course of my career. But the interesting thing for me, and I talk about this with colleagues and with others, is I still remember a classroom that looked and felt different. So for me, I think that phase in my life where I was working for a school division, there was always this sense as teachers of like, why are we being asked to do X, Y, and Z? Don't they remember what it was like? Don't they remember what it was like to be in the classroom? But the classroom has been changing and there's been lots of shifting. And I don't think it's a matter of people forgetting what it was like to be in the classroom. It's that it's actually really changing and has become increasingly more complex. And then
Right.
on top of all of that, at the division level, and this has been a bit this is something that I think a lot of even educators maybe don't really fully understand, because I certainly wouldn't have without some of my understandings from what my dad did. But like the school division is, they're your employer, which means that they have to wear different hats, right? They have lots of competing interests
Yeah.
and lots of expectations to manage. And it can, I just think understanding the different roles that people play in the different education sectors is really important, and not a lot of people really, because who has time to understand what
Sure.
everyone else is doing? And so for me, I don't think it was necessarily that there wasn't really anything going on. It wasn't like
Yeah.
anything bad happened. I really actually enjoyed my time in the division
Yeah.
office. I liked the work, but I think I just felt that what I was wanting out of my career and where I thought I could add value definitely lay more in being able to support teachers as opposed to kids. And I know that,
No,
like,
I
does that
get
make
that.
sense?
No, that totally makes sense.
Yeah.
I share many of your kind of sentiments in that in my own experience, going from a classroom teacher to a consultant. And then also at the same time, I was part of our like a local bargaining. So I had more than the average teacher. I had more insight into, oh, there's a lot of moving parts in this system. There's just a lot of things going on. And so when you just have blinders to say, whether I'm a teacher, that's what I do, or I'm an administrator, that's what I do. And again, I think teachers are probably the most vulnerable to that because there's so many of them and that's just what they do. And they don't have as many experiences to know there's a lot of pieces here. And yeah, and then I was very much fascinated towards like, how can I help my fellow colleagues? Cause I was there.
Exactly.
And so
Exactly.
I still feel that way. Like I still feel like, man, teaching is a crazy hard job and it's
Yes.
only gotten more difficult. And again, the best school divisions and leaders I know are super empathetic towards that. And so
Absolutely.
they get it right away and they lead with that empathy, even though I don't think there's another organization, institution in the world that has the complexity of I think about school directors and superintendents who
Oh,
have to
yeah.
deal with their teachers, their parents, their students, STF, School Boards Association, governments, ministries. They're just coming at them, right? And trying to make sure that those relationships are solid and are right. And knowing that sometimes there's competing purposes to those
Yeah,
things. And it's a really difficult and
for sure.
fascinating institution. And again, I think the
Absolutely.
role that you're doing now is really, it's just a critical part of it. Has to have that. Like you
Yeah, and
have,
that's exactly it. And because obviously I work with HR, but across the table from school division HRs, but it is a lot about recognizing that we both have our roles to play.
Mhm.
We both have our processes. We're very about process. We care in my work, it is so very much about good process. And
Sure.
it's my job to make sure that there's good, fair process. And but at the end of the day, what's great, at least with the people that I've been able to work with, is recognizing that we might have our different roles and we might have our different processes, but ultimately we actually want the same thing,
That's right.
which
That's
is
right.
right. we want teachers to be
Happy,
successful.
healthy employees. We want them to be
Exactly.
happy. We want them to do well. We want them to be awesome and feel
Yes.
great about their job. Yeah, we both want that,
Exactly.
right?
That's everybody's goal. That's my goal,
Right.
that's their goal, and
That's
when you
right.
can remember that, because of course there are times when things are tense or where you're in
Yeah.
conflict, you don't agree. That's often
Right.
why these things are happening. These kinds of situations pop up in the work that I do. But to be able to bring it back down to that, like, we actually want the same thing here, and I respect your role and your process, and I hope you respect my role and my process, and let's, like, try and manage this in a good way, right?
Yeah. I always like asking people again. I got the word leadership is in the title of the show. So I just love you to think if you've got, is there a leadership challenge you can think of? And you can go back to your days as a teacher. It could be something more
Mhm, mhm.
recent. And obviously you don't have to give away all the anything
Oh,
confidential
detail.
and detail,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
challenge that goes to your mind, but that was a tough one. And even if it didn't end out perfectly, because that's part of leadership too, is sometimes it doesn't always work, but just one that kind of sticks with your mind around, that was a tough one.
A challenging leadership situation. Yeah, I would say, and I'll use an example from when I was teaching overseas. I taught in an international school in the second country that I taught in. It was in China, and it was a private international British school. And I was fairly young, still teaching there. I think I was 26 when we moved there. And I had two little kids. I was married at the time, and we were both teachers. And so we went to teach at this school, and we had a 2-year-old and a 5-week-old. And that probably sounds crazy, but it was great. It was a great experience. And I went to go teach in this school. And I hope I can say this without sounding conceited or anything like that, but I'm very driven to like, I seek leadership opportunities. That I'm motivated to move up the ladder, or what's next? How
Sure.
can I contribute here? What is there an opportunity for me to serve through leadership? And very quickly at that school, I became the head of the English department, and then I became the lower, how did they phrase it? Because it was a different system. They phrased the actual title was a middle years curriculum coordinator. So I worked with teachers in different international schools across China to develop this curriculum. And I would say that was challenging. That was a challenging leadership role for me in that context because I was very young. A lot of people who teach overseas are doing it in retirement, right? So there's a lot of people who go and do that
Right.
later in their career. So I definitely faced some experiences where I was newer to the profession. I was young as female, which in some cultural contexts, that's not received the same. And in the school I was in, it was fine as far as who was putting me in that position. But I had students and parents who didn't always have the same views about women in leadership and those kinds of things. So I think that was a very eye-opening experience for me, where for the very first time in my career, I really had this very solidified leadership role that sort of set me apart a little bit from my colleagues. And I had to bring people together and create programming and curriculum and get my colleagues from all over the world to buy into this thing that I was asking them to do. So that was interesting. And that
Hmm.
was challenging for me. And I had to really figure out my leadership style in that experience. But I'm very grateful that I went through that experience because it did force me to figure out what
That's
kind
right.
of a leader I was and how to communicate effectively with so many different types of people, and how to even just influence, right? Get
Yeah.
people to buy
Yeah.
into what I was like,
Right.
this is really important. I need you to try this. And I know
Sure.
I'm this 26-year-old teacher
Yeah.
with two little babies at home, but please try this. And
Yeah.
it went well, but it was challenging for
Yes.
sure.
No, and I love that story because I think there's been a shift really in society over the last, whatever 20 years, that both women and youth and younger people are getting more leadership roles. And so
Yeah.
that, but there is an adjustment to that for people to go, wait, who the heck is she? She's 20. What does she know about the world? And
Yeah.
fine. So you have to accept that you're going to have that. But the other part I think is really intriguing about your story, and it's one that I've come to understand, not having had experienced. But both those people who have taught in international situations, but also in Canada right now, in places like Northern Canada, where you're getting an influx of teachers from all over the
Yes.
world,
Yeah.
and you are leading them, and you can't assume they were brought up in Saskatchewan or wherever you're
Nope.
from and have the same kind of cultural context around how education works. There's probably
Yeah.
a billion assumptions that you make around, say, assessment and evaluation.
Oh,
Okay, we know how we do that in here. And then somebody's saying, we're like, how come we're not just giving kids tests because that's how we did it? Where I like those
yes.
kind of,
Totally.
that's a challenge to get. Oh, and now, all right, so is my role to try to catch you up to speed on the last 20 years of
Right.
culture that has been established here around things like that?
Yeah.
Or do I go, oh, I get it. You see the world differently. And I'm not sure my job is to convince you that's not how we do things here, but
Right.
what is
How
it,
can we
right?
reconcile these competing
Yes.
interests, or how can we bring this together? And, so much about what I've learned about myself and why I know I'm very well suited for the job I'm doing now is because I've learned about myself as a leader that it's very much about listening to people and really hearing them and absorbing, actually taking the time and even the
Right.
emotional effort to absorb what they're actually saying and process that and then do something with it. And to have difficult conversations with people and to not be afraid of conflict, right? I think more and more people are afraid to disagree or are
That's right.
afraid to just have and even to phrase it like, "Hey, I think we might need to have a difficult conversation, but I want to start off by affirming the fact that I'm committed to our working relationship and I want this to go well. And I think this might be something that will actually help us grow, but it might be awkward for a minute. So can we talk about
Hmm.
this?" So to be able to do that in a way, like I'm not afraid to do that. And it took me a little bit of getting there, but you met Milt, right? Like I was basically raised to face difficult situations and have difficult conversations.
Yeah.
And I was also raised in a context by parents who were like, yeah, you can sit at any table you want to. You might have to earn your place there. Like you might have to figure out how to be at that table, but I don't think there's any table you couldn't sit at if you didn't really want to sit there and get to that place. So I just have in my leadership style felt that same way about others too. Like I don't question why somebody is at the same table as me. It's okay, let's have a conversation about what you bring to it. And
Yeah.
then let's try and reconcile where we have those differences in a way that actually helps us all to grow. Because when we just live in an echo chamber, you're not growing either,
Hmm.
right? So,
So how
yeah.
can you take what you just shared or all the things to give that advice to that 26-year-old Meredith or others
Right.
that are in that position now that said, maybe one day I'd like to work at the SDF or be a principal or director or whatever role? What
Yeah.
advice would you give them?
I think it's all about relationships. And you have to actually care about people in order to do this work. You have to care about, if you want to do what I'm doing in education, move up in leadership in education, I think you really have to care about education itself and the state of education. I think you have to be a professional and you have to lean into that part of this work. I think personally, I think the deprofessionalization of education is a concern. So for me, I encourage young upcoming educators to lean into the fact that they are professionals and that means something and that's something to be proud of and to embrace and to really strive to uphold the profession in what you do. And honestly, learn how to have difficult conversations with people. Don't be afraid
Sure.
to ask questions, to speak up, to sit down with someone and seek to understand, clarify. And it doesn't mean that you can walk down the hall and blast your colleague because you discovered some bravery in a moment of frustration. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like really genuinely seeking to understand who you work with and what they're
Mhm.
about. And I think you have to know those things to be a good leader. I think if I was talking to principals, I would say, do you know your staff? Do you
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
who you are working with and who you are responsible for managing? And I'm not saying principals don't. I'm just saying that's
Yeah.
I think if you're in a leadership role, you need to know your people. And that is, I think, the most important thing
Yeah.
about
And
that.
maybe just to add to that is I think about makes me think about it is our ability to accept that other people think differently than us, and yet we can still function effectively
Yeah.
as a team and so forth. And in fact,
It's
maybe
an
being able to
asset.
embrace the fact that I don't think we come at this the same place, but like I said, I always think like that's the beauty of public education, that a kid goes through 12 years of school. Not every teacher is going to be awesome. Not every teacher, you're going to resonate with every teacher you have. Why? How could you possibly? But don't see that as, oh, that was a bad year because I didn't have a teacher that I liked. That was just a different
Exactly.
year where I had to learn some different skills. And that overall, that makes me a better human, right?
Yeah.
Because I
No.
didn't, and not everybody was all awesomely affirming everything I did all the time. And sometimes it wasn't. Again, there's obviously degrees of that we can accept, but that's a
For
pretty
sure.
big range. It's a pretty big
Yes.
range of what actually works.
Yep. I totally agree. And it is about, yeah, people are different. They have different ways of
Yep.
learning, different ways of approaching conflict, different, all of these
Sure.
different things. But yeah, I really think that know your people and actually seek to understand them. And then a lot of the time, it doesn't matter if you end up agreeing or not, because you trust the relationship and you trust that even if you disagree, that doesn't mean the
Sure.
relationship is broken and you can't work
Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
It's what do you, yeah.
That's right. All right. Last kind of question, then I'll hit you with some three quick ones to get
Okay.
out. And this one, people don't like this question, but I'm going to ask anyways. You have to name one person in education that you're grateful for.
This is a cop out because I'm gonna pick my dad. I'm really
You
grateful for
might, but anyway.
Milton. Ask him, he'll listen and he'll be grateful. No, but it's actually true. I am probably my dad's biggest fan other than my mom, and I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing without him. He has always been my sounding board, always been very affirming of who I am as a person and what I want to do with my life. And yeah, to be following in his footsteps. They are big footsteps to follow in. I'm not going to pretend that's not true, but I've never, not one time, been in any way, shape, or form embarrassed or ashamed to be referred to as Milton's daughter. You know, that's always a good thing for me when I walk into a space. And yeah, I'm he's my favorite teacher, so that's who I'm going to pick
Nice.
today.
That's lovely. I would have bet a lot of money on that, but anyway, you never know.
There you go.
All right. Okay. What are you reading or listening to today for your own learning?
Yeah, so this one is going to feel also like a bit of a cop out, but I am currently finishing up my master's degree in administrative education. So all of my reading lately has been very much connected to the learning that I'm doing in my master's program. And I am actually focusing right now on exploring the deprofessionalization of education in Saskatchewan and across Canada, and as it sits in an international context as well. So a lot of my reading has been about that and diving into different studies that are exploring the effects of policy and governance on the deprofessionalization of teachers and different tools and strategies, and how it's not ever one isolated thing that leads to these kind of system changes,
Right.
right? So as far as pointing you in the direction of a specific author, I've just been reading a whole lot of information about studies. And yeah, I couldn't even point you in the direction of an author because I don't think you'd want to, I don't think anyone would enjoy any one of these articles in isolation. But a lot of the reading that I'm doing is very directly connected to that learning. And I think it's important for us to think about
Yeah. And
Saskatchewan.
yeah, thinking about that concept in general, I think it's probably one that people should be just attending to a little bit. And I think
Absolutely.
particularly in the context of retention and recruitment, which is starting, continuing, and will be an issue if we don't get a handle on some of these issues sooner
For
rather than
sure.
later.
Yeah. Yeah. And we have a massive teacher shortage right now. We have a sub shortage. Like it's
Yeah.
so having people want to be in this career is very important, right? We
Yeah.
need people to
Yeah.
want to do this work. So how do we
And it's hard. It's just
maintain?
always hard for politicians are bad for the education, like thinking 10 years from now, right? You
Right.
got to think about, you can, yes, you're solving for today's problem. I get that, but you also have to. And the challenge, of course, is that politicians and leaders are often so near retirement that there's a little bit of consciously or subconsciously, I just going to get through these next 2 years and then it's going to be somebody else's problem. But
Right.
but that's not really thinking thoughtfully around
Right.
this is
Well,
you if you got kids or grandkids, you should be thinking about this.
For
right?
sure. And interestingly enough, your comment about where people find themselves in their career and what they're doing at that point in their career, I would have to say I am in a little bit of a unique position here at the Federation in my role because there's just me and one other colleague that are in our early 40s, and most of our colleagues that do the same work are near the end of their careers. There's definitely this conversation around succession planning and how do we make sure. So I am in that position right now of being in a role that I will be in for a long time, so I am thinking about those kinds of things, like what is
That's
my
right.
job going to look like in 10 years or 15
Yeah.
years? And so I think it's a unique opportunity for sure. And I feel so grateful that they
Mhm.
hired me to do this work and be part of this in a way where I am in it for a really long time.
All right. So when you're not reading all this heavy stuff about deprofessionalizing educators, do you have anything that you just like a bingey, a trashy, maybe something you watch? You got to have something to get away
For
from it
sure.
a little
I
bit, right?
do. Yeah, this is like very timely because I was just explaining to a friend that like when work is heavy, I tend to lean into the stereotypical trashy reality TV shows. So I've
Sure.
been watching Survivor. It's season 50 of Survivor. I can't believe it's been around for
Paula's
50
got me in
seasons.
on it too. I'm all in on it. So don't,
Are you
I'm
like
caught up to
I
speed.
I'm
I'm with
totally
you.
in it. They've got what,
I'm with you.
Colby from season 2 is on, and season 50. I'm just like reliving my girlhood youth watching these
Yes.
people I watched however many years ago play. So that's been my guilty pleasure lately is just binge
Sure.
watching Survivor 50 and getting myself caught up. So there we
There
go.
you go. It's a good one. Last question. So you could take this a couple different directions. You could be, because you're in Warman, right?
I am. Yeah, that's where I live.
So it could be Warman, it could be Saskatoon, whatever you like. But I want you to give me what's a hidden gem of a place. Could be a restaurant, could be just something that like maybe not a lot of people know about, but this is a cool thing you should
Yeah,
check out. What
absolutely.
is your
Okay.
go-to spot?
So I'm actually going to pick a location that's halfway between Warman and Saskatoon. It's called Twin Peaks, and it's an ice cream place that it's open all year, but it's on a dairy farm. So it is literally like cow to cone ice cream, which is unique. It's a unique experience, but let me tell you, it is the best ice cream I've ever had in my whole life. And there's a reason that they can stay open in the dead of winter because it is always busy and the ice cream is always good. I fully
I like it.
recommend this stop for anybody who's traveling that highway between Warman and
Okay.
Saskatoon. It's worth the drive.
Good one. Listen, what a pleasure, what a joy to reconnect and hear the insights on your thinking, your story, and your leadership. I thank you for it. I just so enjoyed connecting, and I know you'll have all the great success in this role moving forward.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for asking me to participate in this podcast. I think I'm still in that position in life where sometimes I have to like, wow, people care what I have to say. This is so amazing. But I just really appreciate that you're giving people a voice to speak into these important topics. And yeah, I'm grateful that you asked me to participate today. So thank you.
You bet.